Welcome to another episode of Take Up Space. So today I'm super excited because this is a conversation I've been wanting to have for so long. And I think me and this guest that I'm about to introduce have this conversation and these conversations every day, all the time outside of here, but we're going to do it for you guys. So the guest today is Sapna Patel. She is the owner of Embodied Path. She's a psychologist and she specializes in internal family systems. She's been trained in that. So without too much noise, I'm just going to introduce her. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Hi. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm going to start with how we met because I think it's interesting.
Okay.
Not that much, but we went to the networking event, right?
For South Asian therapists.
South Asian therapists. And we just by chance got seated next to each other. There's no spots left. So
Right.
it wasn't like I was drawn to you.
Well, you were late, remember? And then you had to sit next to me because that was the only spot open.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it wasn't like we were drawn to each other.
Yeah, right.
We were
You just
forcibly
ended up next to me.
ended up next to you. But we hit it off.
Yeah, we
I
really
think,
did.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think we started talking about internal family systems right off the bat, or like you were
Right.
talking about
Yeah.
something you were going through. So since then, it's been like only 6, 7, 8 months since I've known you, but I've had so much fun with you. We've
know.
went to 2 ecstatic dance events. So if people that are listening don't know what that is, I didn't either, but Sapna introduced me. Dallas Movement Collective is an organization that does this, right? So you come together, and I'm trying to describe it for people, but you come together, it's like this open floor where you're just allowed to dance and express with like a DJ sometimes, live music, but with no choreo, no like other intention, just to be like feeling your body and feeling alive within it, and then also connecting with other people and being witnessed.
Right, exactly.
You introduced me to that. It was phenomenal.
It's more like embodied dance of like being able to dance from within and be able to express your body in whichever way it wants to.
Yeah.
And to be able to, release and experience connection. And
That was really hard for me. I remember talking to you about it after the first time. Like, I am been a dancer my whole life, and I'm used to performing. So coming into that space, even though nobody was watching me and like just do your own thing, I was still performing. I had to be like, nobody's watching you. Just feel into your body, and it was really hard. So how did you hear about it first? Like, how did you get into that?
Actually, a friend of mine who lives in Canada was the one that introduced me, and she was familiar with the program, and there's a branch here in Dallas, and so that's how I knew about it.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. You seem to like be able to do the embodied dance in a way where you're not worried about who's looking, what's happening, or any of those conflicting parts that I had, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, so it's been a journey for me to come to embody my body and like really listen to the wisdom of my body and allow it to do whatever it is that it wants to do. Yeah. And it's been a process.
I love witnessing you do it.
Yeah.
Because I can see, like I see you in the day-to-day and we have these conversations around the work, and then I see you on the dance floor doing the embodied ecstatic dance, like not caring a shit about what anybody's watching. And
pretty much.
I love it. I love it so much. Okay, so for today's episode, this is a PSA, a public service announcement to all my South Asians or anyone really, who has faced like that barrier, that stigma around mental health and getting help. If you're past that, like if you haven't passed that stigma and you haven't gotten help, then maybe not this episode, listen to another one. But if you have passed it and you're actually in therapy or you're getting help, and if you're just talking to your therapist, I believe wholeheartedly that you're missing out. Like there are so many new modalities that actually incorporate both your mind and your body. And we have like not necessarily been focused on that in mainstream media. You think that you can find a therapist and just talk to them. And what we've learned is that that's solving maybe a part of a problem or a part of yourself, but not necessarily the entire picture. So that's why internal family systems, what Sapna specializes in, is something I'm so passionate about and so interested in, as is she. And I was hoping that we could start with you just kind of giving us an introduction of, like, how could I even begin to explain what IFS, which is internal family systems, is to other people?
Yeah.
What it consists of, what it looks like, and how it's different than just talk therapy or CBT.
Yeah, so from my experience with IFS, it's actually more of a holistic modality that understands our internal world through parts. And so it's such a great modality that integrates the mind and the body and
Right.
understands ways that we might store trauma and experiences in our body as well.
Okay.
And so this is where the limitations come with talk therapy, is that we can't just talk about what's happening. We have to be able to feel into what's happening
Right.
and access the parts that might be carrying our wounds, our pain, the difficulties. And the only way we can truly get there in a safe and respectful way is to be able to work with all of our parts.
Yeah.
So the way that IFS works is that we have what we call firefighters and managers, which are our protector parts.
Okay.
And those are parts that basically, they help us like live our lives, but they also help protect us from deeper pain and deeper wounds that we might be carrying from, years and years. Like it could be things that might have happened when we were, a child,
Yeah.
or multiple experiences as a child.
Yeah.
And sometimes those experiences can feel overwhelming or feel too much or too difficult to process. We may not have had the resources at the time to be able to process those things. And so then they get exiled. And so this is where the protector parts come in, because they use all these strategies to be able to sometimes prevent those wounds from surfacing, or they try to overprotect or have a reaction to the pain, and they
Okay.
use other strategies to try to move away from the pain.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar. I use this with some of my clients as well. But if we were to explain, like maybe starting with what a part is,
Okay.
like because it can be confusing to hear that. I know for some people it's really intuitive to say like a part of me wants to go to the gym and a part of me doesn't want to go to the gym. But what is a part, right? Like, is
Yeah.
a part a thought? Is it a sensation? Is it, what could a part be defined as?
Yeah, so that's sometimes a difficult question to answer, because a part can actually have thoughts, feelings, sensations, experiences, memories, somatic memories.
Right.
And so to me, a part can be, a period of time. Like it could be referring to a younger self,
Okay.
like a teenage part, or a 8-year-old part, or a point in time in our lives when we might have had certain experiences, and then
Okay.
that part can carry those memories and those feelings or experiences from that
Gotcha.
time.
Right. And then
Yeah.
you said firefighters and managers are protectors, and then you have the exiles, right? I think it would be helpful to hear like maybe an example. So
Yeah.
like what does a firefighter look like? What does a manager look like? And then how would an exile show up?
Yeah, so managers are typically parts that try to prevent the exiles from even showing up in the first place. So these could be, the parts of us that might work a lot, or,
Yeah.
distract in certain ways,
Yeah.
or, be busy doing certain things.
So they're more of like your constant day to day,
Exactly.
how you show up
Right,
almost.
yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Whereas firefighters are more of the parts that come out after the exiles or pain might show up. So if we have a certain emotional response or reaction, firefighters might come up with strategies to move away from the pain, whether that's, using alcohol, drugs, eating, any sort of ways to douse the pain.
Yeah, I love that it's called firefighter. It's like an emergency part, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
it's basically like saying if your manager has failed to do its daily duties of protection, I'm going to come and put out this fire. And so what you're
Exactly.
saying is that could look like not kind of the terms I've heard it the most is when someone is, let's say they're binge eating or they're going through like those more on edge, I need something direly right now to help me not feel whatever is coming up for me.
Right.
So it's that like, what's my plan B basically? What's my
Yeah.
backup plan to not my day-to-day source of coping?
Right. And I will say that, all of these strategies come to us, through certain means, right? They're not all
Yeah.
bad. It's that they're
Yeah.
all trying to help us survive and help us keep going. And they've
Yeah.
come up with these strategies that might work in their own way, even though, other parts of us might have reactions to those parts too.
Yeah.
So it's like they've learned how to do this because it's a
Right.
strategy that works, but sometimes these parts can get a negative rap.
Yeah.
And so part of IFS is also to try to understand what they might be doing in our system and how they might actually be trying to serve us, and then be able to work with them to then
Yeah.
go to the exile in a safe way.
Yeah, and that part I think is the most fascinating. So the first book I read for IFS was No Bad Parts by
Dick Schwartz.
Richard. In that book, like, he started talking about the concept of parts and all these things, but the title No Bad Parts alludes to the fact that each of our parts, no matter if they're not necessarily doing something that is an immediate positive thing, like that looks positive on the surface, is serving a purpose, like you're saying. Like, there is a root and reason for why that part exists. Maybe they learned to be that way for whatever reason, or or they're a new part, or whatever it might be, like that happened. But that level of compassion towards ourselves and everything that shows up, good, bad, ugly, that we once defined as good, bad, ugly, has been simplified by Richard Dick to a part. It's just a part.
Yeah.
It's a part that needs your attention, and you want to stay curious with it. So that to me was fascinating, because immediately so much external shame just kind of like dusts off yourself, right? You're
So
like,
that's what I love about IFS, is that it's such a non-pathologizing approach. It understands our entire system in such a respectful and compassionate way that then these parts are more willing to work with us, and we can also gain their permission to go to some of the deeper pain, because these parts are also often exhausted. They've been doing this for such a long time, and they don't always want to continue to do this, but they sometimes don't know a different way, because they don't know how to get to the exile in a safe way, or have the resources to be able to take care of that exile.
Okay. So coming to the examples, what's an example of like an exile that you think would be common or resonate with people?
So our core exiles might be some of our deepest wounds. It could be, feelings of, so I'll describe it two ways. So our exiles might take on certain beliefs. So it could be that we don't feel good enough, or we feel like we're too much, or, all the core schemas that we might take on. But at the root of that may be certain experiences that we might have had that led us to come to believe that. So if we might have been shamed in a certain way, or if we might have been criticized, or if we might have, experienced certain harm or been hurt in certain ways, then these parts might carry those wounds from those experiences, and then not be able to fully process it. And then it takes on these beliefs that they're bad in some way, or that they're stupid or dumb, or not intelligent, or not good enough, or whatever that may be.
So is an exile, like, would you say that it typically holds a specific memory?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It holds certain memories, and that's what we do, is in retrieving the exile, we go back to that moment in time where they might have experienced something harmful, and then support that part in whichever way it needs.
And that's that process of what Richard called, or Dick called, unburdening.
Right, exactly.
Which is the ultimate goal of IFS. So, like, if you could describe, like, what a session with IFS would look like, and what that journey, at a high level could be from beginning to where you would maybe see some resolution.
So the whole process would be first working with the protector parts to understand their role in the system and what they might be trying to do to help protect the system and also protect the exile. So it's getting the permission from those protector parts.
So an example, like somebody who's like a workaholic, that could be a protector part. That's something that they do all the time to feel safe, right? And to avoid any potential exiles to come from resurfacing.
Yeah, so, managers can also show up in a lot of different ways. Even in session, it can show up by maybe talking a lot, or wanting to tell a story in a certain way, or, they can show up in many different ways. And then they can also be firefighters, like numbing parts or dissociating parts. That also try to manage the pain that might also be coming up.
Do you see both in session usually?
Yeah.
So like somebody could be, I think what I'm picking up what you're saying is like, and I might have noticed this in my clients too, is they're talking so much that they're avoiding the part where you go into the body and focus in on something.
Right. So again, it could be that manager, that's what it's learned to do, to not have to feel the deeper pain because it might be too difficult. So that's where, if we can try to understand the role of what these parts might be doing, then we can help these parts give us the space and this is the key with IFS, is for us to be able to access self-energy.
Right.
So the only way we can actually go to the exile is if there's enough self-energy on board to then be able to go to the exile.
Okay.
Because self-energy is the very thing that's healing.
Yeah, yeah.
And every single one of us has self-energy within us. And that's the very thing that we're trying to help clients access before going to their exiles.
Okay, so self-energy. Topic on its own.
Yes.
Because we hear it all the time. Like, I think before I knew about IFS, I would hear things like my higher self, or my wisest self, or my parent's self. Like, there's these terms that get, all jumbled. But what I, first of all, love about IFS is for the first time you see a modality in therapy that is both science-based and it is allowing space for like magic is what I would call it, or like spirituality or, religious spaces too, right? Like for the first time you see those worlds colliding. And a lot of therapists will talk about like, well, parts work existed for ancient years, like for years, because there are other theories like ego state and, things like that. But what they don't include, what has never, in my opinion, been included, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the concept of this state of being of self.
Right.
This capital S self, right?
Exactly.
And so that is what IFS introduced, which then, if you're coming from a place of any religion, if you're coming from a place of spirituality, you can actually, use a method, a technique that incorporates that part of you. It doesn't isolate the part of you that believes in something higher that we all have access to, right?
Right.
So speaking of self-energy, how would you define that to somebody who doesn't know what it is? Like, what does that feel like? And you're saying that it's a part of the process. So how does it fit in?
Yeah, so self-energy, just as you said, it's the higher self. And some people might use language like the soul or our best self or, like capital S. Yeah.
In No Bad Parts by Dick Schwartz, he talks about in Buddhism, they call it something specific. In Christianity, they call it something specific.
Right, exactly.
Hinduism, they call it Atma.
Right, like many different religions have called it their own language.
Yeah.
So when you know that you're in self-energy, you might feel things like being in the flow state, or you might feel more carefree, or you might feel more spaciousness inside.
Okay.
And, Dick Schwartz talks about the 8 C's of self.
Which are,
so
I wrote them down. I was like, we got to say them, right?
So there's curiosity, compassion, connectedness, creativity, confidence, courage, calmness.
Yeah.
And
calm, curiosity, confidence, courageous, clarity, connectedness, compassion, and creativity. So all these C's. Do you think he just needed 8 C's? Serious.
Well, there's been a lot of theories about maybe there should be some additional ones too.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I was like, how did he come up with exactly 8 C's? But no, these words, they make sense. So like you said flow state or a state of spaciousness. Like what is an experiential like feeling of that? Like how would you describe that?
Yeah, so this is, something that I feel in my body too, is whenever I can feel myself being in self, I feel like this electricity through my body and sort of this tingling, and it's almost like this flowing inside.
Okay.
Like energy is just flowing.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like my body becomes more of this open vessel. And it's just like this really positive, tingly feeling.
Yeah. Okay. And that is a part of the process, right? So one thing that I think is important to note is that self-energy is something that everyone has.
Exactly.
And it cannot be destroyed or broken or wounded or something around that.
Right. That every single one of us has access to self.
Yeah.
It's just that a lot of our parts are covering up the self.
Okay.
So this is the work in being able to get the protective parts to be able to give us the space to then access enough self-energy.
And with that energy, we can actually do more of the healing work.
Exactly. That with self itself is the mechanism through which the healing happens.
Yeah.
That self in itself is healing.
Right. Self in itself is healing.
Right.
So, okay. So you're saying when you go through an IFS session, you start with the protectors, you make space, you're looking for self-energy.
Right.
And then where does it go from there to get to like burdening someone's memory that's within the exile of their trauma?
Right. So usually what we find is after we work with the protector parts, the exile becomes more revealed of what these parts are protecting.
Okay.
So once we can get those parts out of the way and their permission to give us a space to go to the exile,
Yeah.
and once there's enough self-energy, then we can start determining where we might be carrying the exile. So what's really fascinating, and I've done this with many, many clients, is they can tell me exactly where they're carrying it in their body. And so when we start going there, we start feeling the sensations in their body, and then we allow that to expand, and then we start feeling some thoughts and feelings, and then certain memories might surface, or certain periods of time. We figure out what age that part is, and then we flesh it out to where we see the scene of when this part might have developed.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And then with self-energy, we go into that scene and support that part in whichever way. And so when self-energy is caring and compassionate and connected, it can go to that part and be what that part needs that they may not have received at the time.
Okay.
So it could be the sort of the compassionate presence of being able to validate whatever feelings that part was having, or help that part if it needs to get out of a harmful situation. It can be retrieving that part. It could be supporting that part in processing all the feelings it could not have at the time.
Yeah.
Just whatever is needed that could not happen at that time.
Yeah.
So that's where we get stuck. You know, these parts get stuck in a point in time because they're frozen in that moment.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying self-energy goes into that moment and kind of retrieves them from it?
Right.
Is that
Yeah.
the right
Or
word?
it's more providing what they need.
Okay.
So, you know, when you think about a child that might have, you know, suffered in a certain way, like say, for example, a bullying example.
Yeah.
You know, if a child was bullied and came home and didn't talk about it, then that child might be stuck in those feelings and not feel supported.
Yeah.
And so then it's almost like being the parent that the child could not have
At the time. Yeah.
and being able to support the child in whatever way it was feeling and what that experience was like and what that part needed or any of that.
And that's so fascinating because I've learned that, you know, imagination can also feel like the more you imagine something and sit in that for longer, it feels like it really happened, like to your brain, right? Because what you're describing is you're basically going back in to a memory that happened the way it happened.
Exactly.
Right? And you're saying I'm going to take self-energy to that and almost like rewrite it, if you will,
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
and that's purely using visualization and imagination.
Right, so it's actually implicit memory. So this is where the trauma is stored in our body.
Okay,
our
yeah.
body it still carries the implicit memory of these experiences. So we actually don't have to even use our imagination. Our body can just reveal it and almost like use our senses to show us.
Okay, yeah.
So sometimes it could be sort of felt senses, especially if it might be pre-verbal trauma,
Yeah.
where we might not have any sort of cognitive awareness.
Right.
So we might feel sensations in our body, we might feel feelings in our body.
Yeah.
And, you know, at other ages, we might, you know, have certain thoughts about the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting because when I was in my own journey, and I might have shared this with you earlier, but I had sensations that would come up in certain situations, and they were so extreme that I had no idea
Yeah.
where they were coming from. So it would always be like in relationship when I would lose the person that I was with in like a romantic, actually even in a friendship, and I'd
Right.
lose that person, I'd lose that partner, and the pain that like logically I knew that, okay, this is sad, and you know there's going to be grief and I need to move forward, and that felt a bit more like rational, if you will, but the body experience was like, I mean, I know it might feel extreme to say death, but it just felt so painful.
Right.
And only like years later, I learned that I had some pre-verbal trauma. So that's some
Exactly.
stuff that happened when I was 2.
Exactly.
And that caused me to be away from my parents for a period of time. And and I didn't know that in my conscious awareness, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So when I connected it to what you're just saying is like that, what I know now is that when I lose someone, that wound of abandonment from that exiled part perhaps is showing up, and it's
Right.
so painful, but now I can connect, I can relate to it in a very different way.
Right, exactly. And that's why it might feel so intense in the moment.
Yeah.
Like things that happen in the present moment can feel so intense because it's pulling all these other feelings from the past.
Right, which is overwhelming to
It
say
is.
the least.
Exactly. It can be. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was gonna, just to like rewind back a little, is if our listeners are listening to this and they're doing therapy and they're talking and they're hearing about IFS and they're intrigued, one of the things I notice the most is when you first ask someone, a client that I'm like transitioning from talking to more IFS work or EMDR work, when you ask someone to pay attention to their body and like what it feels like inside, that alone can be so uncomfortable because they're not used to that, you know. And I've seen a lot of people just kind of like, you know, kind of laugh it off. Like, this seems like a waste of time. Like, can we just talk about that thing? Like, I got this much time. I got like all these problems. Let's talk about them. And so what's the word? I guess selling or like helping them buy into the concept. Is that a part of your process? Or is it more like, I'm going to respect that this is where they're at and, you know, approach it with something different? I know direct access is a thing, but like, how would you
Right, so
handle
this
that?
is where I stay with the protector parts, because to me, when they're not able to go into their body, then that's highlighting a protector part, that it feels too scary to go into the body.
Right.
So I stay with the protectors, and if they just want to talk, then we talk, and I basically do direct access with the protectors.
Okay, can you explain direct access? Because to me, that's CBT.
Yeah, so
Right?
so direct access can be regular talk therapy. Yeah.
Okay, how would you describe it?
So to me, it's different with IFS because I have a framework in my mind of what's happening and which protectors I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So that helps me have a map in my mind as to, you know, what parts are having which roles.
Okay.
So that I can support clients in understanding those parts within their own system.
Okay.
So we take it really slow. You know, I'm not trying to go into the body and, you know,
You're trying to force it.
Yeah, we can't force it.
And
we
it wouldn't
really
be
have to get the
productive that way.
permission of protectors and get them on board. And oftentimes, I don't even have to, like, ask them to go into the body. Sometimes just when the protectors are able to take a step aside, the feelings automatically show up in the body.
Yeah. You navigate it and how
Exactly.
it shows up. And I bring that up because there was one thing I was going to bring up, which I guess you did your thesis on, but it says introspective awareness, which is basically like me paying attention to my inner experience, right? Like that, when I was reading through about IFS and how I could maybe like explain it different than talking to really get people to, you know, be open to this experience. It's said to have more power to influence our level of happiness, and it involves deeper structures of the brain.
Right.
So it houses like within our limbic system, where things that are more emotionally triggering are probably stored or earlier are stored. So learning that, like to say that it has power to influence our level of happiness,
Right.
I think maybe is a good point to bring up, and maybe you can help expand on how that relationship between not therapist and me, like when we're talking to our therapist, versus me and my inner state of being, how is that different, and what level of resolve or happiness that could provide?
Yeah, so my understanding of that and experience as well has been that, to me, that happiness that you're describing is the access to self-energy. So introspective awareness, from my experience, is, even for me, when I meditate on the sensations in my body, the parts that are carrying those sensations are able to then give me the space.
Okay.
So it's almost like in meditating on the sensations, they almost like move through my body, and I'm able to release the feelings I carry through meditating on sensations. And then I can access more self-energy. And that's the process of then feeling more lighter or happier or whatever that may be.
Okay. And, you know, the way I take it is that when we are empowering our clients to access more self-energy, it's that they're more independent. So, like, you know, this mainstream model of therapy around talking or whatever, it does create kind of like, oh, I need to make an appointment with my therapist when I'm experiencing da-da-da-da-da, which is fine, which is normal, and that's what we're here for.
Right.
However, with self-energy, it's kind of like you're giving them something that they already have.
Exactly.
Right? Like you're reminding them like, hey, here's your power, just reclaim it. And then you can be independent on your own going forward. So that's something that they have access to all the time.
Exactly. That's why I love IFS, is because it empowers clients to understand their own internal system and work with their own system every day. And they don't have to wait for the therapy session always. They can, you know, kind of experiment with their own bodies and their own experiences, and then feel shifts in their body and experiences too when we've also done some of the work. I know.
It's fascinating.
It
Which
really
is why we're
is.
so obsessed with it.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear like maybe an experience or story you have with a client or yourself that you've witnessed like this process go through, where you're using IFS, you're in the body, you're focusing, you're understanding someone's system, their protectors, their managers, maybe firefighters, and their exiles, right? And maybe you're at the part where you've created the space, you have the self energy, and you're working with an exile. What's like one of the most maybe fascinating or experiences that kind of stuck with you in witnessing that unburdening for either someone else or yourself, like whatever you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, I think, I mean, even from my own experience, it's really amazing the wisdom that self has. It's like once self completely takes over and it's working with the exile, the therapist doesn't have to intervene. Self knows exactly what to do and what needs to happen next to support that exile.
Right, right.
So to me, that's been the most amazing thing, is that it's almost like then it's hands off. I support
They're doing
clients.
it, yeah.
They're doing it, and self energy is doing it because it inherently has its own wisdom and knows exactly what to do to heal.
Yeah. Do you have an example where someone has actually, that you've witnessed that unburdening or exiling?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many.
Whether it's someone else or yourself.
Right, yeah. Let me think about which one to share, because there's just been so many.
Yeah, because I can't imagine, like, that process must be so... it's so interesting to witness. Like,
Right,
that's
exactly.
literally healing happening real time, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you're getting to experience it.
Right.
Which is why we do what we do. So like that to me, yeah. If there's any of those moments that have stuck with you.
I mean, maybe I can share from my own experience. You know, for me, I think one of the most difficult times in my life was moving to the States. And so,
where were you before that?
So I was born and raised in England.
England, okay.
And then moved to the States when I was 12.
12. Oh wow.
Yes.
Very young. Yeah.
So I was very young, and there was just so many changes that were happening all at once.
Yeah.
That my 12-year-old self, I didn't realize how much she was carrying and how much she was adapting to, and how much she was also alone in a lot of the transitions and changes that she was going through. And so for me, in being with that 12-year-old self, I could be with her in all of her, the pain, the struggle, feeling alone in some of the transition, and then basically support her as if like there's a friend there that's helping her with all of the changes.
I see. So that was like a 12-year-old part of you that was exiled.
Yeah,
fair to say?
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say exiled, but maybe just carrying a lot of burdens.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because, that was a time when, my parents were still in England. We moved here ourselves and we're with other family members. So that was a huge transition of no longer having our parents around, being in a brand new country, a whole new culture, a whole new school. I also skipped a grade. So I went from, I think, 7th grade in England to high school in America.
What? That sounds like a lot.
Right. It was a lot. Yeah. So, just all of the changes in the transition. And I don't think anybody really understood how much that was for a 12-year-old to go through.
Okay, so you're saying, so that was an exiled, or a part of you that carried a burden, this 12-year-old part who needed that. And what you witnessed yourself do is use self-energy to go back and be that companion to her?
Yeah, it's like almost being a parent to basically acknowledge all of the grief of having to leave my friends in England and leave my school that I absolutely loved.
Right.
The transition of coming to a whole new country, having to let go of my accent because others couldn't understand what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, all the adjustments in making new friends and school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you experience this with your imagination? Like you have, in your mind, like you were saying, like it's kind of interesting. Do you imagine like a higher self going to like an older version of you meeting the 12-year-old and literally like engaging with her this way? Or is it more like just a felt sense of like, I'm taking this energy from my higher self and going towards that exiled part wherever I experience it in my body?
Yeah, so it's more about having that welcoming energy from my self-energy to then see what that 12-year-old needed to share with me.
Yeah.
So I think from my 12-year-old, she was quite frozen and dissociative because there was so much she was experiencing.
Yeah.
And it was too much for her nervous system to even handle. And so as I've been able to help her unfreeze, then she's been able to share all the feelings that she was carrying that she could not process with others.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's so beautiful. And so what do you do with that? So where does your 12-year-old part, like, where's that now for you?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of relief for her because she
Okay.
feels like somebody's listening and somebody's hearing how much of a struggle it was and all the different aspects and all the different pieces of it that I don't think were understood.
Yeah.
You know, not just like leaving her country, leaving her home, leaving her friends, but the adapting to a whole new culture. It was such a
Right.
culture shock in coming to America and having to navigate all the new social norms and, you know, kids and middle school and high school and all of that too.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. I know
sure.
it's personal. So if I were looking at this, like trying to really conceptualize it, the 12-year-old part that you have that you just talked about and unburdening whatever burdens it was carrying, for you, how did that show up before you knew? You know what I mean? Before you knew to go there, to witness, validate, you know, this 12-year-old, how did you know that that was something that you needed to do? Like, what was showing up as the protector covering the exile?
So for me, I experienced a lot of my trauma in my body. So I have had this chronic jaw pain for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I've come to
this, like, you experience in your jaw, literally,
in
right?
my jaw, yeah, and it's almost like frozenness in my jaw.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I've been kind of working with this jaw pain, trying to understand what's happening, and then it seems to always go back to that 12-year-old self.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it's connected.
So it's like this is where I'm carrying the 12-year-old self's pain.
Like, literally, the
Literally
sensations
in
are
my face.
in your jaw.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Like, I was just very curious about, like, where it goes.
Yeah, that I have no idea.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I always wonder if there is a correlation.
Yeah.
Because I've had this, like, physical sensation when I feel shame, toxic shame. I've always felt it a lot more in my shoulders and up here towards my right shoulder. And I learned that when I was what I was talking about, the pre-verbal trauma, it involved getting hurt, and it was one of my arms. And I was like, oh, is that correlated? Like, is it the same arm? But does it look like that usually, or can it be very different?
It can be really random.
It can be very random. Okay, that's good to know. So we're not like, so when you're experiencing it, it really just whatever you're feeling in that moment and wherever. It doesn't have a logic behind it or an explanation.
And it might be some sort of scientific explanation. I just don't know it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do know from clients, you know, a lot of people carry things in their throat, their heart, their stomachs.
Yeah.
I carry a lot in my calves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And you work with that, like using parts work.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine when I started using IFS in therapy, I also have now had to find a therapist who does that so I can understand and see it in real time, but also get the benefits of it. I always like to have experienced what you're giving to other people first. Did that help you on your journey?
Oh, for sure.
Okay. And do you constantly see an IFS therapist?
Yes. Yeah, I've been seeing an IFS therapist for the past 3 years, I think.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, I went through the trainings and, you know, met this therapist through one of the trainings.
Yeah.
And it's been such an amazing fit, and we've just discovered so much together. It's been really amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love this. I think it'd be interesting to give back to the people listening in just kind of what they can dabble into. Because the way I see it, IFS is something that you know, yes, you should go to a therapist who can navigate you depending on where you're at in your journey. But I also think it's something you can take with you regardless. Like, it is, once you get the hang of the process, you can tap into that whenever you want, right? So I wonder if there is something in terms of tools and tips that we can give, in your opinion, to people listening that have never experienced IFS, but want to experience maybe just the self-energy part, or even just the process of tuning inwards, like that introspective awareness that we're talking about.
I think one thing that can be really helpful is to find ways to access self.
Okay. Yeah.
So different people are able to access self in different ways. So I can describe the ways that I access self,
Sure.
and then maybe if you want to share some of
Totally.
the ways you do. For me, like I said, my body is sort of the primary tool.
Yeah.
So meditating on the sensations in my body helps clear things out to access self. I also find like being in nature is really helpful for me, or water is really helpful for me. So swimming is a really great way for me to access self-energy. Spaciousness It's something you don't really often think about, but any sort of spaciousness helps me access self. And that could be so simple as not having anything in my schedule and having unstructured time to just be and not to be doing, because for me, like, doing is coming from my managers versus just being is a place of being able to rest in self.
Yeah, like you're neither here nor there.
Exactly.
You're really just in the
just
moment.
here in the moment. So self is more present oriented.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're saying experiencing self, finding ways to tap into those 8 C's.
Exactly. Yeah. And so for other people, it could be like even just spaciousness in terms of outside, like being in nature and hiking. Or looking at the sky and seeing the expansiveness of the sky. That can be helpful in feeling the expansiveness inside too.
I do similar things to access self-energy, but I think, one thing I'll share for me, at least, like, is the first time I experienced self-energy was very much unplanned. Like, I wasn't trying to tap into self-energy.
Right.
It just came to me. It just happened. And it was this moment where I was like in one of those situations where I was like in a relationship that was turbulent, a situationship as the youngsters call it. And I knew that there was a point where that relationship should end, and it was really clear why. And I knew that. And it was ending. But at the same time, like, I found myself, I had 2 parts completely active and wanting 2 different things at the same time. One that was like, okay, I see that this relationship needs to end because it's, it's getting to the toxicity levels that it shouldn't, and we need to step away for safety. And then I had one part that was like, no, we need connection. Like, I don't care if you're not being treated well or safe. I need this connection.
So this is what we call polarization.
Okay,
where there's a conflict between two parts,
right? And I remember, like, just like I would dabble, like I'd go from feeling this to feeling this to feeling this, and at some point something in you comes up where it's like I became an observer to that experience.
Exactly. Right.
Unplanned. But God, am I thankful that part of me came online, and I started to observe, like, at some point I'm just like, how can you, both, like, we can't do both, what is it that this part of you wants, and what is it that this part of you wants?
Right.
And can I be present and just observe the duality and the complexity and the nuance here? Right?
Yeah.
And that was my first experience of it. And it didn't solve the problem, like, to your point. Like, it wasn't about action or doing. It was like a moment of just, let me understand myself a little better.
Exactly, it's curiosity. So you're able to access curiosity for what these parts were needing.
Yeah, exactly. So that curiosity came on just like a gift at a random moment. So now, of course, like, fast forward years later, I can tap into these things because I've experienced them, right? And I know them. But for me, that first moment was not an intentional tap in. So I'm curious, like, has that happened to you? Or
what you're describing is actually mindfulness, right? So it's when we can unblend from our parts and observe them and have a different relationship with them. So that in itself, like, that's why meditation is so helpful to access self-energy, because it's become an observer of all our thoughts and feelings and parts.
And to me, that is the connection between IFS and spirituality in this way is what has kept me tethered to this modality. Like, I'm so invested and interested. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Okay, my new round, which will be short, but it's a rapid fire. So I'm going to ask you some fun questions.
Okay.
And you can answer or not, but, like, to the best of your ability. So, really quickly, what's one thing you do daily to prioritize your mental well-being, no matter how small?
I mean, for me, it's meditating.
Really? Every single day?
Yeah, I meditate pretty much all day.
Okay. And does that look like IFS, where you're, like, going into the body, feeling the sensations, or do you use, like,
So it's more of the body scan.
The body
it's
scanning.
Just observing what's happening in my body, what parts are showing up, what parts need my attention. And then also feeling self-energy is when I can feel self-energy, then being able to observe that, and that also helps it expand.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, every day. Oh, what's one societal norm you wish people would challenge more often?
So this is
the deep breath.
My struggles with our culture and some of the understanding around our feelings and emotions. I just feel like there's such still, even to this day, like such a negative view towards our emotions.
Yeah.
And, you know, our emotions have such value and there's so much information in them, and they are
Agreed.
there to help us survive and support our well-being.
Yeah.
But there's so much about like moving away from feelings, getting over it,
Right.
you know, suppressing, avoiding,
Right.
you know, spaces not being open to people's emotions and feelings, and so people having to set their feelings aside all the time, and then not enough spaces to then actually be with our feelings.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's just so many cultural messages.
Agreed.
Yeah, and the more I've come to kind of go through my own process, the more like reverence I actually have for my feelings. It's like
Oh,
my body
goodness, yeah.
knows something before my mind knows it.
Yeah.
And the more I can tap into that and understand it and understand the inherent need, like every emotion has an inherent need.
Right.
If we truly just listen
Yeah.
and tap into that.
Yeah.
And it's for our survival.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the thing what we're denying of ourselves.
Agreed.
Is our body, it's trying to help us survive.
Yeah. It's this concept like in our culture where the negative connotation around certain feelings isn't tolerated. Like
Right.
if it's crying, like for me growing up, it was a lot of like, don't do that. Like get over it.
Just get over it. Yeah.
Move on now.
Right.
And I'm just like, okay. And that creates more exiles, more
Exactly.
protectors, right?
Exactly.
Like, or burdens within
Right.
them. And at some point we come to our lives and we're just completely disconnected from what we feel. And I think that what you're saying is so important. And I resonate with it so much because I also have this like, had this what would I call backlog of feelings to feel, you know, and these like numbing experiences to manage my backlog. Like,
Right.
I got to manage this backlog with this numbing venture. So I couldn't agree more. Like,
Yeah, and what happens is as adults, then we're not just living in the present, we're having to process all of these
Yeah.
feelings from the past
Yeah.
while also living in the present, while also being adults and trying to
too
go to
much.
work and take care of kids. It's a lot.
okay, last one. What is the funniest piece of advice you've ever gotten about mental health? Funniest.
I mean, I was actually going to say what you said was
it?
the advice of like, just get over it or just move on. Like, what's
Yeah.
wrong with you? Why
Yeah.
can't you just forget about this? Why are you still bringing this up?
Yeah. The why are you still bringing this up like kills me. Like, are we done? Or like, I can't remember. Like recently, I think I was bringing up like something that happened when I was 2, and somebody around me was like, "Do you really need to talk about this?" And I'm like, "Yeah,
Yeah, right. That's why I'm talking about it right now.
I do need to talk about it. Thank you very much." Anyways, okay, thank you so much, Sapna.
Yeah.
I would love to have more conversations with you. I know I wanted to actually chat about legacy burdens and talk about some
Yes,
other
there's
things.
so much more we can talk about.
Yeah, but I'm so glad we did this much because I think the intro to IFS and just understanding the model at its like core and basis is a good entryway into to getting deeper into it, right?
Oh, yeah.
At the very least, hopefully, like it gives you guys an opportunity to maybe be open to not just therapy, but also different types of therapy and really go seek out what is all out there. Because you only see what you see and you only know what you know. But hopefully with this conversation, you know more and you have more options. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We did it.